Hello everyone and welcome back to The Hobby Musician. I'm really excited about today's episode because we are going to completely rewire this instrument. And when you clicked on the video, you probably noticed that timestamp and you might be thinking to yourself, that seems a bit longer than normal, and that's because it is. I specifically wanted to make sure that I showed in this video every phase of the rewiring process because I know that there are a lot of people out there just like you who might be at the point where they need to rewire an instrument, or they might be just considering wanting to try rewiring. So I wanted to make sure that I had time to show details and demonstrate every single step along the way. Now, what specifically are we going to be doing? We're going to be working on this bass guitar, and this particular instrument belongs to a friend of mine, and she started to notice that recently when she would play, there started to become a little bit of a hiss and a hum in the signal that she could hear. And then as she continued, day after day and week after week, that noise started to get worse and worse until, honestly, the signal coming from this bass just became a garbled mess. Now, this particular instrument has a built-in active preamp system. So there's a battery compartment, and that preamp module provides a lot of extra EQ shaping. And she did everything that you should when you're troubleshooting a preamp or an active instrument. She changed batteries, changed cables. She plugged in the instrument in different venues, into an amp, direct into a soundboard. Everything that you're supposed to do that could be a problem, she checked out. And at the end of the day, it really comes back to the fact that this particular preamp module seems to be going bad. So the decision was let's replace it. Let's completely remove the electronics in this and replace it with a dead simple, quote unquote, normal passive wiring. So this project is going to be in 3 phases. The first phase is we're going to just remove everything that's in here. The second phase is once we have everything out, I'm going to show you a little bit of the method to shield the cavities in your instrument. So whether or not the shielding is necessary on this bass could be debatable, but there are many cases where shielding your electronics cavities can actually help reduce hiss and hum. So this provides us the opportunity to do that. So that's going to be phase 2. And then phase 3, you guessed it, we're going to put in the new electronics. So right now, to get to work, I'm going to change up the camera angle a little bit. So I'll be back in 1 second and we'll get this project underway. Okay, we are back, and what you can see here is this is essentially what we're starting with. So all I've done, I've pulled off the back cavities here, and you can see the battery compartment. I've taken the battery out, and you can see kind of this packed in mess of wires. Now, there are a couple of things that I did right before I started filming. I did some tracing and I labeled a couple wires, which I'll talk us through in a second. But this is essentially, if you kind of get the image of this, we're going to essentially remove everything in here and get ourselves down to a bare cavity to then put in the new wiring kit that we got. In essence, the only things that we need to really pay attention, I needed to know where the 2 pickups were coming from. So this particular model has a neck and a bridge pickup, and I just needed to know, and those wires are coming out of the body right here. So I traced them back, and I put little pieces of tape and I labeled which one was the neck and which one was the bridge. And I could also verify that by where they were connected in the current system. That's one thing I needed. The second thing I needed was this wire. The overall grounding wire also feeds back into the body, so it's underneath all this. You can't see it right now, but it's underneath, and it goes up into the body and through the body, and it's attached to the back side of the bridge on the front of this instrument. And that is pretty normal. That's pretty commonplace for whatever model of guitar, whatever model of bass you're using. Chances are that is where they're grounding it, and that ground wire goes. And of just about everything else, you'll connect to a central pot, and then you'll take one single ground wire off. So those are the 3 things that I need to kind of figure out where they are, because those are the 3 basics that I'm going to attach. Everything else I can kind of just detach and unsolder and snip if I need to just remove, because we're going to put everything else new back on this base. The last thing that I'll kind of talk about is, for these, I am going to unsolder the wires that I need to keep, and then I'm going to snip the wires that I don't need to keep. And that's just a little tip. I don't necessarily, I know that there's a lot of excess wiring here. I don't necessarily know how much wiring I might need or where I'm going to put the new pots. So I want to just retain as much wire as possible. So I've got my soldering iron here, and I'll start with the pickup wires. And what I'm going to do, they're attached right here. They're just a signal wire and a ground wire for each of the pickups right here. So I'm just going to, you can get in here, and I'm going to hold the wire and just touch and melt the existing solder and pull this wire off, right, just like that. So now it's detached, and I didn't have to snip it, so I retained kind of that wire just in case I need it. I'll probably end up having to cut these down anyway, but better safe than sorry. And I'll do the same thing with the other side here, just kind of getting in, being careful not to melt, too much or touch the wires in a place where I might melt through unintentionally. There we go. The second one's off, and then both grounds are kind of attached in the central place, so I'm going to come at them together and just pull. And just like that, now I can also maybe try to separate these two apart a little bit. There we go. Just like that, we have detached the pickups. So now I can take these wires, and I can actually, what I typically do in these types of projects is I will feed these wires back out of the way, and I'll just take a piece. This is painter's tape, so it's so I don't really want to run the risk of damaging the finish. So I'll take some painter's tape, and I'll just tape them to the back of the guitar, and look like that. Now they are out of my way, and I can continue working. I'm gonna do the same thing for the ground wire. I'll just get down in here. The ground wire is connected to the back of this pot. There's a huge dollop of solder because a lot of things need to attach to the same ground. So it might take a little bit extra work to try to get this loose or free. But there we go. Okay, the ground wire is free. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to feed the ground wire, and I might need some tweezers here. Because as I said, it's hard to see it because they fed it underneath. It's a pretty good wiring, design. They fed it underneath everything. So I'm going to try to pull it and feed it back out and out of the way of everything else going on in here. And I'm kind of just letting it try to travel back its path here. And it's a little harder because I put the label tape on it, but I didn't want to forget. I didn't want to lose track of it. So there it is. There's our ground wire, and it feeds, again, as I said, it feeds back down into the body underneath all of this stuff and out the front side to connect to that bridge. So once again, put a little piece of painter's tape on this to hold it back out of the way. And what we have here, all of this can now be detached, and I can come on the front side of the bass, and you can, different models of knobs, sometimes the knobs just pull straight off, sometimes there's a tension screw. So I'm going to remove the knobs on the back side of this bass, and I'm just going to, between snipping wires and unsoldering wires, we're going to take all of this out and be back for the second phase of this. So I'm going to switch over to a time lapse now, but I'll be back in a second. You'll watch kind of all that happen, and we'll continue on with this project. Well, there you have it. We are all set. We've got the old electronics completely removed. And as you probably could tell in that time lapse, really the only things I had to do, I had to just disconnect the wire that led to the battery compartment and then feed those wires out. Then I disconnected the output jack, any of the wires that led, or the input, I should say, the input jack. And because once I did that, those were the only things that were leading out of this cavity. Everything else that was still connected was all connected inside the cavity. So when I flipped the base over and, pulled off all the knobs that you could see, once the knobs were off, all of those pots I could just remove together. So the entire preamp system is still wired together, so I didn't have to really waste any time, but it's right there, and that's how easy it was to kind of remove this. And as we said earlier, now we're down to a bare cavity. These are the pickups, that's the ground that's going to go into the new system, but we're now ready for phase 2. I said at the beginning of the video, I wanted to demonstrate the shielding process. Shielding is something that you can do to instruments if you're noticing maybe low-level hiss and hum, if it doesn't progress like this bass did, but if it's just constantly there, it can be due sometimes to interference. Lights and other cabling on the stage can be producing electromagnetic interference, and you can take the common way to shield these types of things. There are certain types of paints you can buy. You can buy like metallic paint and paint cavities. But one of the things I found is using metallic tape. This happens to be copper tape. So it's copper on this side, and then there's a backing. It's adhesive, so we'll peel this off. But if you line the cavity with this and create essentially a cage, kind of a cradle, and you put everything else in here, taking that cradle, and then the last key is taking a ground wire. If you connect the metallic surface to the same ground that the whole rest of the electronics are on, you are creating what is known in electrical engineering circles as a Faraday cage. And that really just helps to electrically block much of the interference that could be coming in here. So it's super easy to do. We're just going to do the coating. I'm just going to coat the cavity here, and I'm going to bring the tape up and over the lip of this in a couple places, not the whole way around, but I'm going to do that because the back side of this cover, so this is the cover, and if you look at the back side, they've coated the back side with metallic tape. I think this looks like aluminum. But by coating this, if I bring up my edge of the copper tape here, when I put this back on, it'll smush down and that copper will contact. So not only can I have a bottom cage that's protecting, when this goes on top, it actually completes the cage so that this entire cavity can be, once I ground it, once I wire a ground wire there, the entire cavity can be a little more protected from external interference. So that's all you got to do, and I'll show you kind of the first one here, and then we'll switch over to a time lapse. But you just basically you measure out, or I just eyeball it. I measure out kind of a length of tape that I'm going to put in there. Okay, that's about this long. So then I'll cut this off. And the cool thing about this tape method is that any tape you get, they're incredibly bendable. So if you're a little too long, it'll bend and you can kind of push it into corners, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really easy to work with. And then you can cut small pieces. If you have a weird corner that you're trying to get, you just cut that shape into the tape, and it's really easy to get the whole thing covered and grounded. So like I said, it's a little backing. It's like a sticky back. So you just peel it off like this, and I try to hold it. You can see my hand down here. I'm holding it so it doesn't curl on itself, too soon. But then I'll just take it, and then just down here, I'm going to take it and try to do like a long strip right along the bottom, and you kind of just maneuver it where you want it. And then I get it pretty close, and then I start pushing it into all the nooks and crannies here. Like I said, it's super easy. It's bendable, and I can cover large areas all at once. And as I'm doing this, you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, what about all these holes? What about the holes that the pots need to come through? And well, that's a good question. What you do is you take something pokey. So I think I covered, for instance, there's one back here. You take something pokey and you just poke through it, and now you've got your hole. Let's see if you can see that there. But that's what I'm going to do. It's easier to cover this whole thing. Here's another one. Here's another one right here. I'll just poke right through it. And it's so easy to work with that there you go. Now we've got poked through holes, and you just kind of keep going and it doesn't mess up. Now I can still have that nice even bass. So I'm going to switch over. You'll watch me do this, the rest of this kind of in time lapse, and then we'll be ready to put in the new electronics. So, all right, I'll get to work. Okay, phase 2 is all complete. You can see in here that we've got a nice shielded, kind of fully coated cavity with that bright copper tape. And you can see, like we talked about, I also made sure that in several places, you can see I didn't do it everywhere, but in several places I made sure to come up over the lip so that when that top cover goes back on, we can kind of have electrical connection for the whole cavity. And you can see I poked the holes for our pots to eventually go in. So now we are ready for the final phase. Phase 3 is putting in the new system. And as we said, we're gonna just use a super straight, super normal, regular system. Lots of companies offer this, and the kit that we're using came from Stuart McDonald, not a sponsor. It just happens to be the company that I get a lot of stuff from. And they offer pre-packaged kits where they have put in all the components you need, as well as wiring diagrams for a variety of instruments. If you've got a Gibson Les Paul, if you've got a Stratocaster, they've got different switches, different numbers of pickups, all that kind of stuff. They've got pre-made kits, and so do other companies. So what we've got for this bass was a basic kit for 2 pickups and a toggle switch. Now, if you kind of caught it earlier, this bass didn't used to have a toggle switch, so we're going to be doing some different things to install this. But the first thing that we're going to do is I want to address, sometimes wiring can be the overwhelming thing. If you're new to it, if you haven't done much of it, you open up something like this, and you start to look at the pictures, and you're going, oh my goodness, I don't have any kind of electrical engineering background. I have a degree in this stuff. And so these kinds of pictures can sometimes be overwhelming. Well, I'm going to give you 2 tips right now that really help me. I also don't have any kind of degree in this. I just kind of slowly started picking it up. And the 2 things that helped me was I realized that these diagrams, even though if you take them all in at once, they just look like a garbled mess. But if you really narrow down, any single line on these diagrams just indicates connect one point to another point. And if you take that approach and you do it one line at a time, pretty soon you will have connected up every single line on this diagram, and at no point was any single step that complicated. It's just adding them up all together. That's what you get. So for example, I'll put up an image, a better digital image of this now, and you can see here, for example, I'm just going to highlight one of the connections. You can see on the volume and the tone pot, these 2 particular pegs, you can see that they are connected with a line. So I know that I need to solder one short piece of wire to this post on that pot, and I need to solder the other point to the other pot. And then I can either check that off or cross it off or whatever you want to do, but that's taken care of. And then I go through this diagram just one by one. I find what wire, they show where the pickups come, the necks, the bridge, where they go to the switches, all of that stuff. I'm just going to do it one wire at a time. That is the first tip. So now the second tip is, okay, let's start shoving everything in here and start working. Well, the second tip is don't do that. Don't shove everything into the cavity quite yet. There is a lot that can be done that does not require the pickups or the ground first. And soldering, when you have your soldering iron and your tweezers and your little wires, sometimes working in an enclosed space can be difficult. So I have taken the shipping cardboard from the box, and what I've done is I've actually taken this underneath the guitar. So I put the piece of cardboard underneath the guitar, and I took a pen and I went into each hole and I did a little circle of where each hole physically is, and then I did a trace of the bottom of this guitar. Okay, I did a trace, and then I put a little arrow here. That's where the input jack is, and I put a little arrow here. And what I created, you can see here, is a perfect space representation of where these things go. And from here, what I can do, I can take, either a screwdriver or whatever it is, and I can poke holes in the cardboard. Maybe I can. I can poke a hole in the cardboard, kind of wiggle it out exactly where a pot goes, and then I can go to my kit and I can pull out, I'm only going to have two pots ultimately, but I can pull out one of these pots, and instead of putting it into the guitar, I can put it here. I'm going to place it on the cardboard, and what this does is I can take the bass and I can move it off the table, and I can place these things and I can turn them so that they match up with wherever the diagram is, and I can cut wires and stuff, and then I can be soldering here on the workbench outside of this cavity, because then when I'm ready, when I just can't do anything else without the pickup wires or the ground wire, when it's time for those, everything is perfectly measured and soldered. I just pull them all out and then take the whole thing and just drop them in, and they will all fit in because we made this to scale. So that's the second tip. When you're doing this, try to do as much soldering as you can outside of the guitar, and then when you just have to start using these wires, then you can pick this whole thing up and go, and then you got like 80% of the job done and you weren't working inside of it. So that's what I'm going to do. You're going to see, I'm going to switch back over to a time lapse, and I'm going to set up, I'm going to make little notes of where I want the volume and where I want the switch to be. And I'm going to start doing that here on the board, and then just transfer it over and go in through there. So that's what we're going to set up next. So I'll be right back. All right, we're ready to do our transfer. And as you could see in that time lapse, I was working on this cardboard and just using my wiring diagram, I was just tracing out whatever lines didn't need anything to do with the pickups or anything to do with the ground. And as you can see, this is what I got. These are all of the connections that I could make from the switch and the different pots, without needing to be physically inside here and starting to connect these. So I'm now going to transfer. As we said, the benefit of doing this is that now all the lengths and everything are kind of held together in exactly where the components need to go. One thing I did have to do, it was right before I started, when it came back for this video, this switch, the three-way selector switch, actually is a little bit bigger. This threaded portion that needs to go through the body of the guitar is wider than the previous hole was for the old knobs. So what I did was I very carefully took a drill, and with a slightly larger, I measured to get just the right drill bit to fit the threaded size. So you can see in here now, I've got all of the kind of normal size holes, and then this one's a little bit bigger, and that's because, as we said, the threaded portion of this switch is a little bigger. So I am now going to carefully pull these out, pull them out of the cardboard, and just transfer them in and place them where they need to go in the cavity here. So you can do this, I'll try to move this on so you can kind of see it here. You can do this, if you have a friend or somebody around who can help you kind of do this, you just try to carefully kind of pick up. So I've got the whole thing here, and now I'm just going to move this in, and it doesn't have to be perfect right now because I'm just kind of trying to push and maneuver all these wires in here.
But you just tip down and put the points of those pots in, and once you kind of get them in there, you can kind of let them look, and then you hear they just push down and they're ready to go. They're down in there and ready to be connected. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to worry about the switch right now. I've still got some more wiring to do. There's more components that need to be attached here. But what I am going to do is I'm going to try to secure these two. I'm going to come back. It's okay to have some play here because I don't necessarily know exactly which way I want to turn this quite yet. So these two pots I'm going to hold, and the securing the washer and the nut for the top are right here. So I'm gonna do them, I think, one at a time. I'm gonna try to hold this, and without turning it upside down. I don't want to turn it upside down because everything will fall out again. So I'm gonna kind of maneuver and come back and put the washer on and just finger tighten. I don't need this to be super duper tight, but I just want to finger tighten that nut back on here so that, you know, it's secure in there, and I'm not going to have to worry about this thing kind of wiggling around or anything like that. And I'll do the same thing. I'll grab, here's the nut, and I'm going to take my finger, and you watch this. I'm going to push from the backside, and actually I'm on the wrong one. There. Okay. Yep, that one. There it is. So that one's about as far up as it can go. So I'm going to just catch. All I need to do is just catch the top few threads of that. You know what? Well, for right now, we'll go ahead. We'll just secure this one. I might have to rearrange and maybe kind of move some of the things so I can get a few more of the threads to pop through there, which is okay. And then you can see there's the switch that will go there at the end. So now flipping it back over, what I can now start to do is I can go back to my wiring diagram, and I can finalize. I can now start connecting. Here's the pickup wires. And so I can see where the grounding wires need to go and where the signal wires need to go. And I can, again, take the master ground back to where it needs to go and just kind of keep working back in the cavity because I got a good portion of it done outside of the cavity. So, all right, switch back over to a time lapse and we'll get kind of these things put in there and we'll be basically done. So, all right, time to get to work. All right, everybody, we are finally all done. So you can see in that time lapse that after we got everything in, I did the last couple of connections. The two wires that came from the pickups had their signal wires and then grounding wires that needed to be attached. The overall grounding wire that we set off at the beginning had to then be connected. So all of the grounds I was connecting to the back of the volume pot, just like the wiring diagram kind of shows all those connections. So I connected that up. And then finally, it was the jack, the input-output jack, whatever you want to think of it, needed to be connected up as well. And then what the last couple of things I did, we mentioned during the shielding part that I had to remember to connect a ground wire for the shield to the same grounding kind of circuit that everything else is. So that's what I put over here. You can kind of see on the side, I soldered it and then covered it with some copper tape just so it looks nice, but there's a solder joint under there, and then that's there as well. And then the last two things, this is cosmetic. This has nothing to do with wiring, but you'll see that there are two small pots in here. Now we only had a volume and a tone in our rewire, but these two small pots are the old pots that I've completely snipped off everything, and they're just literally sitting in here to be cosmetic dummies. Because if you look at the front of the base, this base originally had 5 holes. Now we put back in, there's a master volume, a master tone, and a 3-way pickup selector. well, then there was going to be 2 holes here. So what we did is I just took those knobs, and then we'll put the knobs back on, and they're not going to do anything, but at the very least, it will at least look cosmetically like nothing else is missing from this. So that really is the whole thing. There's nothing else. We're going to put the cavity back on, and then I'll come back. We'll plug it in, test how it sounds, and we should be good to go. So yeah, that's all it takes. So the next time I'll get the back plate kind of put back on here, and then we'll get this video wrapped up with some sound samples.
Okay, everybody, we are all set up. We're ready to test to see if this thing actually works. And personally, whenever I finish a wiring project, I dial up a tone. I'm not trying to do any kind of studio quality sounds and signals for you. I just want an amp on because I just want this thing to make noise. If we got a wire cross somewhere, we'll just get no signal at all. So that's what we're going to test right now. And remember, just from what we were doing a minute ago, there's only a couple of these knobs that are actually going to do anything. So in our new wiring setup, we're only going to have a master volume and a master tone. These are the only 2 knobs that work. These 2 are just cosmetic. They're here to just fill in the previous kind of holes that were there. And here is our pickup selector switch. So when it's down, I wired it so that the bridge will be picked up, and when it's up, it'll be the neck pickup, and in the middle is both. So let's see, I'm going to put it, well, we'll do the neck pickup first, and right now everything's off. So that you're just hearing acoustically the strings. So turning the volume, let's just go crank it all the way up. We got something now, so we can, there's a signal coming through it. And let's see, so we got that tone. Now I'm going to turn the tone knob all the way up. Back up. Yeah, so it's affecting, it's shaping the tone, and I know it's not great quality kind of coming all through the same thing, but let's see. So that was our neck pickup. Let's switch down. We got the volume all the way up, the tone all the way off. There's something. If I turn the volume off, that's just acoustically. Okay, so we got signal. And let's try the tone there. So we've got everything coming out of this bass, and I tell you, it's a world different than hissing and garbled sounds. So start to finish, that's really the main phases and the main things that you might encounter if you want to do this kind of project yourself. So I want to thank you for sticking with us, for watching this episode, and as always, until next time, play on, my friends, play on.